If you stand on the shores of Tokyo Bay today, you see a modern metropolis. Skyscrapers, neon lights, peace. But close your eyes and listen. Can you hear the sound of the steam whistle? The sound that woke a dragon from a 200-year sleep. The year was 1853. Japan was a ghost. For over 2 centuries, under the rule of the Tokugawa Shogunate, the island nation had enforced a policy known as Sakoku, the locked country. No one enters. No one leaves. It was a secluded, silent world of samurai, wooden houses, and cherry blossoms. They believed they were safe. They believed their spirit was enough to protect their soul. They believed that the ocean was a wall that no barbarian could cross. But on July 8th, the horizon turned black. Not from a storm, but from smoke. From massive American warships, painted in tar, steamed into the bay. They were the black ships of Commodore Matthew Perry. They were powered by steam engines, a technology the Japanese had never seen. They moved against the wind. They ignored the small Japanese guard boats that tried to stop them. They pointed their massive Pakehands guns directly at the capital of Edo. At that moment, the samurai looked at their swords. Then they looked at the cannons. And for the first time in their history, they felt a cold, paralyzing emotion, terror. They realized a brutal truth. In this new world, honor means nothing. Poetry means nothing. Steel means everything. If they did not change, they would become slaves. They looked across the sea at their neighbor, China. The great Qing Empire, the teacher of Asia, was being carved up by the British Opium Wars. Japan saw its future in China's burning cities. This is not a story about progress. This is a story about fear. The fear of being eaten. And to avoid becoming the prey, Japan made a decision. It would become the predator. This is the story of how the Empire of Japan was born, not from ambition, but from a desperate, violent need to survive. To survive the West, Japan decided to become the West. But this transformation began with a humiliation that few talk about, the Iwakura Mission. In 1871, Japan sent its top leaders, including Prince Iwakura, on a journey around the world. They went to San Francisco, London, Paris, Berlin. They went to negotiate. They expected to be treated as equals. Instead, they were treated like children. In London, they saw the underground railway system. They saw factories churning out steel battleships by the dozen. They saw the sheer scale of the Industrial Revolution. In Paris, they saw the wealth of an empire. They looked at themselves in the mirror and they felt small. They felt primitive. A deep inferiority complex was planted in their hearts. They returned to Japan with a radical, terrifying idea. Everything Japanese is bad. Everything Western is good. We must kill our past to save our future. This led to one of the most bizarre periods in Japanese history. The government built the Rokumaikan, the Deer Cry Pavilion, in Tokyo. It was a grand European-style ballroom. Japanese diplomats and their wives were forced to wear Victorian corsets and tuxedos. They were forced to learn the waltz. They ate beef, which was previously banned in Buddhist tradition. They held lavish balls where they danced awkwardly, trying to impress Western diplomats. They wanted to scream, "Look at us. We are civilized. We are just like you." But the West laughed. French cartoons depicted the Japanese as monkeys dressed in human clothes. The unequal treaties were not revised. The humiliation deepened. And so, the government turned its eyes to the samurai. In 1871, the Dampit-Suriyai Edict was issued. The samurai were forced to cut off their chamage top knots. For a warrior, this hair was their status, their soul. Overnight, the class that had ruled Japan for 700 years was abolished. Their swords were banned. Their castles were torn down. But the soul does not die quietly. In 1877, the last of the true samurai, Seigo Takamori, rose up in rebellion. He believed that Japan was losing its spirit. He believed that a nation without honor is not worth saving. He led his men, armed only with cold steel, against the new imperial army armed with rifles and Gatling guns. It was a slaughter. The Battle of Shirayama was the final breath of the samurai. The machine gun defeated the sword. Seigo Takamori died on the battlefield. But here is the irony. The new empire took Seigo's spirit of loyalty and twisted it. They hijacked the code of Bushido. They told the people, "You must have the loyalty of a samurai, but you must give it to the emperor, and you must fight with a gun." They killed the samurai, only to wear his skin as a uniform. By 1894, the new Japan was ready. The factories were running. The Navy was built. But who would be the first test? Who do you defeat to prove you are a man? You defeat your teacher. For 1,000 years, China was the master. Japan's writing, religion, tea, architecture, it all came from China. But the student had a new knife. The first Sino-Japanese War broke out over control of Korea. The world expected the Qing dynasty to crush Japan. China had the Bayonne fleet, with massive German-built battleships. They had more men, more money, but they were corrupt, slow, and arrogant. The Japanese Imperial Navy was fast, modern, and hungry. The result was a total defeat. At the Battle of the Yalu River, the Japanese Navy outmaneuvered and destroyed the Chinese fleet. They invaded Manchuria. They captured the strategic port of WWII. When the Treaty of Shimonoseki was signed, the shockwave went through Asia. The tiny island nation had brought the giant to its knees. Japan demanded Taiwan. They demanded millions in silver reparations. But this victory did something dangerous to the Japanese psyche. It validated their trauma. They thought, we were right. Strength is the only truth. We are no longer Asian. We are better than Asia. This was the birth of Datsuei-ran, or leaving Asia. They began to look at their neighbors not as brothers, but as resources, just like the West did. However, the West was not happy. Russia, Germany, and France intervened. They forced Japan to give back some of the land they conquered. This was the triple intervention. Japan felt betrayed. They realized that winning wasn't enough. They needed to be undeniable. Then came 1904, the Russo-Japanese War. Russia was the Great White Bear, a European superpower with a massive army and navy. Russia wanted Manchuria and Korea. Japan knew that Korea was a dagger pointed at Japan's heart. If Russia took Korea, Japan was finished. So, Japan did what it always does when it is afraid. It struck first. On a frozen night in February, before declaring war, the Japanese Navy launched a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. The war was hell on earth. It was the rehearsal for World War I. Machine guns, barbed wire, trenches. At the siege of Port Arthur, Japanese General Nogi sent wave after wave of soldiers into Russian machine gun fire. They died by the tens of thousands. They called it the human bullet tactic. It was a tragedy of flesh against steel. But the defining moment happened at sea. Russia sent its Baltic fleet all the way from Europe to save the war. They sailed for 7 months, halfway around the world. They were exhausted, demoralized, and poorly led. Waiting for them in the Tsushima Strait was Admiral Togo Hayakairo. He performed the perfect naval maneuver, crossing the T. In a single afternoon, the Japanese Navy annihilated the Russian fleet. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European superpower in a full-scale war. The world went crazy. In British India, in Vietnam, in Turkey, oppressed people cheered. They saw Japan as the light of Asia. They thought Japan was fighting for them. But they were wrong. Japan didn't want to liberate Asia. Japan wanted to own Asia. The victory over Russia was the point of no return. The fear had mutated into arrogance. The Japanese military believed they were invincible. They believed they were chosen by the gods. They believed their spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. 1919, the Paris Peace Conference. The end of World War I. Japan sat at the table with the victors, America, Britain, France. Japan felt it had finally earned its place. Japan proposed one simple clause to be added to the League of Nations Charter, the Racial Equality Proposal. It simply stated that all races should be treated equal. Japan thought, we have the guns, we have the ships, we beat China, we beat Russia. Surely, we are equal now? But the West said no. Australia feared Asian immigrants. America feared the backlash at home. President Woodrow Wilson and the Western powers rejected the proposal. This was the breaking point. The moment the heart of the empire turned black, Japan realized that no matter how many wars they won, no matter how good their suits were, no matter how perfectly they danced the waltz, to the West, they would always be just Asians. They would always be the yellow peril. The admiration for the West turned into hatred. The fear turned into paranoia. They decided, if they won't let us join their club, we will burn their club down and build our own. We will build the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The madness started from within. By the 1930s, the Japanese government lost control. A culture of gekukujo, or insubordination, took over the military. Young officers, fueled by poverty and fanaticism, believed that the politicians were corrupt and weak. They believed they answered only to the emperor. They began assassinating their own leaders. In 1932, they killed the prime minister. In 1936, during the February 26th incident, they killed ministers in their beds and tried to take over the palace. The rational voices were silenced. The train had no brakes. Then came the South Manchuria Railway. If you look at old photos of the Mantetsu, it looks beautiful. Sleek, aerodynamic steam trains cutting through the snowy plains. Luxury hotels. It looked like the future, but it was an engine of extraction. It existed to suck coal, iron, and soy out of China and pump it into the war machine. The Guandong Army, the Japanese army in Manchuria, became a monster that no one could control. They staged the Mukden incident, blowing up their own railway to blame the Chinese. They invaded Manchuria without orders from Tokyo. The government in Tokyo was too afraid to stop them. The emperor remained silent. The people were intoxicated by news of victories. They had become the very thing they feared in 1853. They were no longer the samurai protecting their home. They were the black ships. In less than 80 years, Japan went from a medieval feudal society to a world-conquering industrial monster. It is the fastest modernization in human history, but the cost was their soul. To build the empire, they had to dismantle their own culture. To protect their freedom, they took away the freedom of others. To prove they were civilized, they committed the most tragic acts of the century. The Empire of Japan rose from the fear of being colonized, and in their desperate run to outpace their shadow, they ran straight off a cliff, dragging half the world down with them. Today, the steam trains of Manchuria are gone. The Zero fighters are rusted in the jungle. But the lesson remains, because when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. Japan didn't just look at the West. It became a tragic reflection of it. To avoid being eaten, they became the monster, and the cost was their soul. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark psychology of history, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the signal reach through the noise. And tell me in the comments below, was this tragedy inevitable? Could Japan have survived without becoming a monster? Thank you for watching.